Hi there, welcome back to my channel. I want to speak to you about what I feel is really lacking in society right now, and that's common sense. It's a pretty broad topic, and believe me, I think to be honest with you, I see it. It doesn't matter what the demographic is, I find. I almost kind of thought like when I first sort of saw it in my youngest son who's 20, this lack of common sense. That's when I really started to think about it. But then, I'll have a client come in my office, 45 or 60 or and every race and color sort of thing. However, that's my perspective right now as a Canadian living in Manitoba. That's what I'm seeing. It could be completely different wherever you are in the world, on the globe. But if you feel the same way, let me know because I'm seeing this. And you know what? After pondering it a little bit, I realized that it has very little to do with intellect, which I thought it was connected with, the most, right? Because we're thinking common sense. If you're a sensible person, then you must be a smart person. But I also see that, perhaps like yeah, it can get really blurred because for example, my own story in the last couple days, I've gone from let's say my investments being completely managed to now putting it with a robo advisor. So it's sort of like, set and forget it sort of thing, which is what I was doing with a managed advisor as well. But I was paying more for them. But, you're also paying for a certain amount of skill and practice. So how this relates to the issue of common sense is I'm I feel like I'm smart in specific areas, but I can't be smart in everything. I can't do it all sort of thing. So I realized that I sort of have to accept the way my mind works. And I'm not a numbers person. I think I needed to take more responsibility over money and the numbers, piece of it. And therefore, like I started, looking at the different types of investing you can do. But then I went sort of over and above and thought, well, maybe I can trade and I can, do play around with crypto and stuff like that. And then I had to go back to my humility and realize, no, you can't. You aren't that type of person. And there are some things in life that you need to give up to another person. And maybe I'm the type of person that's okay with spending a little bit more on fees and know that I'm receiving like real one-on-one type of attention when it comes to my investments, which was the managed firm, which is not the robo advisor. Like it all really depends on who you are, what stage of life you're in. And so there's a lot of gray there. There's a lot of gray. And when we think we can just go into one category or another because we want to simplify our lives, that's when it becomes really complicated. And how you don't practice common sense anymore when you do that. Because there is a lot of gray in life. So, yes, understand yourself, accept the person you are, and go back to your values and your virtues. And like, I wrote a blog about this. You can check it out. I'll include it in the show notes. I even did a podcast, an episode on the virtues and the seven deadly sins that accompany those seven virtues that I speak about. And I really feel that common sense has a lot to do with you being a virtuous person. So let me explain. Like we do really stupid things, I think, when in the midst of behaving in one of those deadly sin ways. What do I mean by that? I've seen like intelligent people I've spoken to very intelligent people that, are also extremely greedy. And for example, when you're greedy, you have a lot of difficulty doing works of charity, giving of your time, giving your money. And so if you have a husband who is greedy, for example, they're going to be, yeah, chasing the money and not giving their time to their family. I chose to use the word husband there, but a wife who, for example, might be envious, and that being one of, you know, the sins that she's practicing, then it's very difficult for that woman to be kind to other women that she's envious of. She could, that's, women are great in building up resentment. Let me tell you, I've experienced that full-handedly. And I know a lot of women hold a lot of anger. They may not be expressive with that anger, right? Like as men tend to go from 0 to 100 and be very expressive about their anger, women are less like that, but it's just the other flip side of the coin of, yeah, anger is inner anger, which is resentment, which is almost worse because they're keeping it all inside their bodies. So that's not good either. So we can have great common sense when it applies to certain areas in our lives, and very poor common sense when it's applied to others. I'll give you another example. Let's say pride. Let's say you have a real issue with pride, then you will, it's really hard for you to accept your faults. And the fact, like I said, that I'm I'm sorry, like I'm not a numbers person. And I really, really tried for 2 or so years. But you can't also say, I'm sorry to bring this back to, like, I run my own business, right? So you are responsible, having taking a certain amount of responsibility for that business. You can't just say, well, I'm not a numbers person. I mean, I can't. I mean, I can't just give that responsibility to somebody else. I mean, you always need to know what's going on in your business. If I was like in a multi-million business, I guess I could have my team report to me and stay out of it. But that's not my situation right now. Like I'm a small solo entrepreneur, small private practice. So I need to do these things. And it's painful, but in the end, it's also really good to be on top of what's going on. So I'll do the minimal amount of stuff, but I also need to accept the fact that I'm not really that kind of person, and humble myself that way. I'd love to say that I'm an amazing, successful businesswoman, but I'm not. And I'd be lying to myself if I was. Humility is something that I think of all the virtues, it's something that we really, really need to practice more of. And in terms of pride again, like think of, a multi-millionaire, whoever that might be. Do you think, after like acquiring your wealth, it's super intelligent or makes a lot of sense to buy a huge, huge home? you know, a huge home that you don't use the space in. It's tons of work. I mean, you can't clean that home. So then therefore you have to hire somebody to help you clean that home. And if you're that wealthy, then chances are you're not going to spend a whole lot of time in that home. You probably have more than one home. You probably travel a lot. It makes no sense. You're not, like, it's not common, you're not practicing common sense by purchasing that home, yet you do. So what's the problem? The problem is honor, status, your pride. that you have to, well, look at who I am. I have to own a large home. Otherwise, people would wonder about me. Let them wonder, right? Be humble. So I think that a person who has a lot of common sense is the same person who lives a virtuous life. Let me think of another example of that. When I think about, it's pride. I already spoke to you about anger. So what's the virtue tied with anger is patience. Again, so difficult. Humility, patience, and I think the third one is because we're such in like a society of consumerism right now is generosity. We all want to be bigger, own more, generate more wealth, and it's all like about hoarding and it's all about me, what I need. Even in therapy, like I see it all the time, right? I mean, people who are deep, deep down depressed, I mean, all they do is concentrate on themselves and their life and how their life sucks. It's sort of all this self-centeredness, all this like we're taught, to become self-aware. Well, not to your detriment. I had a guy in my office the other day who was talking about like how he's doing personal growth and he doesn't know why his wife is not joining in the club. It's sort of like because it's all about you. I have to be compassionate with people. So I would never say that, well, we all need to be compassionate with people, but me, especially as a therapist, sometimes you just have to bite your tongue and not blurt something out that is extremely, obvious. You have to give this person time to find that out for themselves. But if they're not picking up on it after some time, then you interject. But you don't do that in the first session. But I really hope that he can see that after a few sessions of what's holding him down and why he's as sad as he is. Because on the outside, it's extremely obvious why this is happening. So again, if acts of charity, like generosity, putting yourself in that other person's shoes, standing in front of a mirror and seeing, your true behavior and that making knocking some sense into you when you see all your flaws and how can I will the good of this other person, how can I make this other person's life better rather than centering all my sadness on myself, how can I make this person happier, right, and give of myself. That's what truly loving a person is. And I've said this over and over. It's all about sacrifice. If you want to have a happy life, it's all about sacrifice. And if you're a man listening to this right now, like stop, like get out of that, like I sacrificed everything for my family sort of mentality. I work hard all day and it's to provide for my family and that's all I've wanted to do is be a good husband and provide for my family. Yes, but not to the detriment of you being an absent father or once you get home to sit on your throne and just feel like you need to be served now because you had a hard day's of work. That's not what a man is or this idea of what a husband is or what a father is. That's not what it is. You're missing the point. We just celebrated the feast of Saint Joseph yesterday, which is like the greatest man, the greatest husband there is. He has two feasts. One is March 18th, I think, where it's like the celebrating what a great husband he was to Mary, just giving himself all the time for her sake and his son's sake. And this recent one, May 1st, was a celebration of him as a worker. All he did all his life was work and sacrifice for his family. But that also means being there for his wife and being there for his child, being part of that child's, being the teacher, being the guider, shaping that child, which happened to be Jesus Christ. Not an easy thing to do. And I think they did a pretty good job. So common sense. It's not about the intellect. It's about, again, looking at the virtues, looking at, the opposites of all the deadly sins, being generous, let going your pride, being patient. Yeah, not being a sloth. That's the other thing too, like, I mean, working hard, as I just said, working hard. Humility. Personally, I think that's one of the toughest ones, I think for me, is not thinking that you're right all the time. Not thinking, oh, well, because of my experience here, or, n- you know, defending yourself, like just sucking it up and saying, yeah, I was probably wrong, you know? So that's what common sense is to live a virtuous life. So thanks for listening. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes I use a script and sometimes I don't. And today I didn't, which which would mean I'm a little more off on tangents and maybe a little bit more confusing. Let me know what you prefer. Like, I will do whatever is the best thing to do for you. If it's using a script and being more targeted, more focused, or being more natural and doing it this way. Let me know in the comments too what you prefer. And don't worry, I won't be upset. Thanks for listening.